Hello, I'm Annette Young and welcome to the 51%, a show about women reshaping our world. Coming up, as fighting continues in Sudan between two military factions, tens of thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes. Aid workers warning women and children are being disproportionately affected by the violence. Also, the UN says it will take us close to 300 years until the world reaches gender parity. I'll be talking shortly to Anita Bhatia, who's just finished her term as the UN Women's Deputy Director, on how women's rights are facing a global backlash. And being a Barbie doll in a Barbie world takes on a new meaning as its manufacturer Mattel launches its first ever Barbie doll with Down syndrome as part of promoting diversity. But first, and fierce clashes continue in Sudan, with more than 100,000 people having fled to the nation's borders, while those remaining are facing power, food and water shortages. As ever in a conflict, it's women and girls who are the most vulnerable. Aid workers warning that they're at greater risk of gender-based violence, not just for those forced to flee their homes, but also those left behind who find themselves trapped in the middle of fighting. James Mulholland has the story.
Setting up makeshift housing after crossing Sudan's western border. Here in Chad, this is the situation for 30,000 Sudanese refugees who fled the Darfur region. Nationwide, as fighting continues, around 100,000 people have escaped so far. Most of them are women and children.
Soldiers came. They shot at us in our homes. We had to leave. Some left to fight and others chased us. We don't have anything to eat or drink.
The World Health Organization says the fighting has made some 3 million women and girls more vulnerable to gender-based violence. But sexual violence is not the only danger they face.
The most vulnerable become even more vulnerable. A lot of people think they are easy prey to try to exploit, and not only for sexual violence. That we are hearing about also smugglers who try to take as much money as possible from these people. It's always in such cases the criminals who have the desire to exploit such situations. This is the perfect field to work.
Across Sudan, hundreds of thousands of pregnant women and mothers with newborns are also at risk, some of them as they flee, but also those who cannot leave, with medical infrastructure damaged in the fighting. In the capital Khartoum, barely 16% of hospitals are now fully functional.
Now, according to the United Nations, it's going to take us some 300 years before the world reaches gender parity. Anita Bhatia has just finished a 4-year term as the Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. A guest on this show before, I saw her departure as an opportune moment for us to talk. Anita now joins me from Washington, DC. Thank you so much for your time, Anita. A lot has happened since you took on the job in 2019, not to mention a global pandemic. And sadly, if anything, we seem to have gone backwards when it comes to women's rights, such as even the demise of Roe v. Wade in the US during that period. In your opinion, what were the UN Women's achievements during that time, and also where did it fail during that period?
I think, as you said, the last 4 years have actually seen some of the world's worst reversals in women's rights, and the level of pushback against women's rights reached unprecedented lows. And so I think one of the things that UN Women did really well during the pandemic was to make the case for the need to pay attention to women's issues during the pandemic, because this was a time when global policymakers were appropriately, of course, focused on solving for the health and economic crisis that the pandemic brought on. But it was really important to not forget women, women's rights, and women's issues. And so I think UN Women did a really good job of making sure that people were paying attention to that.
Now, Iran and Afghanistan are clearly massive black spots when it comes to women's rights. And regarding Afghanistan, the Chinese and Pakistani foreign ministers have been meeting the Taliban, some suggesting that there's support within some UN quarters for the recognition of the Taliban. Is that likely to happen?
I can't comment on whether it will happen or not, but I sincerely hope it won't, because it would be a slap on the face of all Afghan women. You know, we are watching in the 21st century an incredible rollback in women's rights, and Afghanistan epitomizes, what happens when you allow a bunch of men, because that's what the Taliban are, to just trample on women's rights and to try to erase women from the face of the earth. So recognizing the Taliban would be a terrible mistake, in my view.
Does UN Women get the support it really needs in order to do the job well?
So I think we actually have become much stronger in the last few years. When I joined UN Women, I had a visionary CEO called Pumzile Malambo Naguka, and she understood what I meant when I said, look, I think we're in an echo chamber talking to ministers of gender equality and to civil society groups, but we're not really talking to the international financial system and the international development architecture. So one of the things I'm really proud of over the last few years is that UN Women has built very strong relationships with the World Bank, with the IMF, which has a new gender strategy, with EBRD, which has a leader who's really pushing gender and green jobs. And it is really important for a small agency like UN Women, which is a $500 million agency, to influence others. And what we have really, I think, done quite well is to influence the work of the international financial institutions on gender equality, because power comes not from just what we do ourselves, but from influencing those who have access to large amounts of finance, but also provide policy advice that is really important for governments.
Now, the idea that it's going to take 300 years to reach gender parity must be somewhat despairing to hear, particularly for someone like yourself who's committed her professional life to boosting women's rights.
Well, look, we've built many partnerships, not just with the international financial institutions, but also with the private sector. Because when you look at countries, where does most GDP come from? Where do jobs come from? It comes from the private sector. So we've also enlisted business in this agenda. And I think that's really important as well, because we need role models, we need champions of change. And I feel we're at a point where gender equality is front and foremost for many institutions. The issue is that at a time of poly-crisis and intersecting crises, the economic issues, climate change, it's really hard to keep a focus on gender equality in the middle of everything else. So our job over the next few years as gender equality advocates and champions has got to be to make sure that people don't lose sight of this while they're addressing other existential issues that may be seen as more important.
But is that not an impossible task when so many politicians and world leaders are men?
Annette, I agree with you that we should have more women in leadership positions. It's really shocking to me that in 2023, you only have 27 or 28 heads of state or government who are women. You only have 14 cabinets worldwide that are gender equal, and you only have 25% of parliamentarians today who are women. But I do think this agenda cannot be achieved if it is only women who are fighting the battle. We need progressive men and we need boys to also champion gender equality. So I don't think it has to do so much with just the presence of men or women. It is about those who have the right values and are not afraid to be feminists, whether they are men or women. I mean, the truth is we've had institutions where there are women now and there has been a rollback of women's rights. So it's not just about having women in power, it's about having women and men with the right sets of values.
Anita Bhatia, wishing you all the very best for the next phase of your professional life. Thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Annette. Always a pleasure to be with you.
And finally, many of us had one as little girls. I'm talking about, of course, that iconic doll Barbie, who's now the subject of a live-action film. And in recent years, Mattel, which makes Barbie, has been taking some rather dramatic steps to make her more inclusive, a decision also viewed as a smart business move. Monty Francis has more.
Hi, Barbie. Hi, Barbie.
Hi, Barbie. When Barbie hits the silver screen this summer, you may not recognize all of her various iterations. There's, of course, conventional Barbie, played by Margot Robbie. But there's also President Barbie, Diplomat Barbie, and Dr. Barbie, who's played by a transgender actress. Barbie has come a long way since her introduction to the world in 1959. Criticized for her improbable physique, over the years, Mattel has made an effort to be more inclusive and have Barbie reflect the experiences of everyday women, including those with disabilities.
Barbie can play an important role in a child's early experiences, and we're dedicated to combating social stigma and enabling all children to see themselves in Barbie.
In her latest version, Barbie represents a person with Down syndrome. With her shorter frame, longer torso, and almond-shaped eyes, the doll is meant to represent someone with the condition.
If there's ever Barbie with Down syndrome, and it's like me, and it's beautiful, and I love it to pieces.
Mattel's efforts at inclusion reflect a greater trend in the fashion industry. In its May issue, British Vogue featured portraits of disabled activists on its covers, including the model Erin Rose Phillip. From Barbie to the covers of magazines, the conversation is changing. And for once, those who are in the shadows say they're enjoying the spotlight.
And that's all for this edition. We'd love to hear your suggestions for the 51%, so do get in touch via Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. And you can catch our previous shows on our website. So until our next program, bye for now.